Sometime around maybe 2017. This happened while I was walking through the woods around maybe January. Now, January was one of the coldest months of the year, and surprisingly, we had a blizzard one day. Of course, it was snowing pretty hard, and I was walking through a forest trail with a bunch of my friends as we didn't have school and we thought we would go through the forest near the school. As we were walking in the forest, we could see that the snow was snowing hard and we had to stay together as a group. Of course, it was starting to blizzard and we would have to turn around and go back. All of a sudden, we heard an echo or something in the forest. We looked around, but we called out if anyone was there, but surprisingly, we didn't hear anybody. This was starting to get me really uncomfortable and nervous, and we decided to maybe head back the way we came. Just as we were about to do that, we heard what seemed to be a loud shriek that sounded like it came from an animal. We looked over to where the direction was, but we ended up going over to see who or what it was. By the time we got there, we ended up looking around, but we couldn't find out who that noise was or what made it. We ended up going back to our house, and we were just in time as the snow was getting very hard. But luckily, since then, we had never went out in that forest in that storm. But I still don't know if whatever it was still out there, or if it was someone maybe trying to prank call us, or maybe someone or something still wandering around the woods to try to kidnap us. I still don't know what to think of it. We never went back in that woods too much ever again, but since then we still wonder about what was happening at night. But of course, we didn't really know who that person was, but we could tell that it was probably not something not good. We still go by the forest every day now and then, but we still haven't heard back from that person or whoever it was. We never found out who or what made that sound at night, and we're still wondering on what could it possibly be. Okay, so this happened to my friend named Emily when she was driving around town. Of course, this happened sometime back in 2018. When Emily was driving around, of course, she was looking for her way back home as she had to go to a detour as one of the roads were closed due to a car accident. It was snowing hard, and of course, she had to try to get back home from work. As she was driving in the snowstorm, she ended up pulling over to a gas station as the snow was really too bad. So she pulled over to a gas station. When she pulled over to the gas station, she was so surprised that there was only one car, but the building looked dead inside and there was no activity could be seen. Emily got out of her car and thought maybe somebody would be able to help her out with it. And of course, her car had broken down a bit because of the engine. She was near the gas pump, luckily, so she didn't have to worry about it too much. She went over to the gas station, and of course that there was a guy. He seemed to be maybe in his 30s, and he looked over to see Emily. "Hey, is there a phone that I could use?" Emily asked. Of course the man said, "Okay, I can let you a phone that you can use for a tow truck company. Maybe I can take a look at it and see if there's a problem with it." Emily nodded as the guy went to the back room as she was on the phone with the tow truck company, trying to figure out how she can get her car back on the road and fixed, how much it's going to cost, and etc. But as Emily was on the phone, she looked to see that the man had not come back for quite some time. She was wondering on where this man was going to be, so she ended up walking over there and could see nothing. But as soon as she did, she realized that the store she was at was dead quiet, and she never even know who was this man and why was he here. He seemed to be the cashier as he was working in the clothes, but that was definitely something, and that possibly had different possibilities as well. It was something that she never really expected, but of course, that said, it was something that Emily started to feel a little uncomfortable. By the time Emily looked over to see that there was no one there in the back room. But of course, as Emily was on the phone, she was calling the tow truck company. She turned around to see the guy, and of course, he had a bunch of men, and they were not far from him. Emily ran out of there as fast as she could, and she got into what seemed to be being a ran down road a few miles. Her car still was broken down, so she couldn't really risk it, but she got down to what seemed to be an extra place or at least a house not far from the gas station. The people were elderly and they were kind enough to let her in, and once they do, the tow truck company arrived as the elderly couple called the cops. As soon as they did, the guy was already gone with the men, and they looked everywhere, but they couldn't find anybody, or anything for that matter. With that being said, they ended up looking around the area of the gas station, and they found out that that gas station was abandoned and nobody was supposed to be using it. But with that being the case and that being said, it was so unsure of who or what it could be. But with that possibility, though, they had no idea as to what this person could be doing. But with that, Emily had never returned to that gas station, and she never went down that route ever again, as she feared whoever this guy was probably not a worker, probably just luring her into a trap. She wasn't sure what those people would have done. They could have either robbed her, kidnapped her, or do God knows what. As soon as she got a ride home from her friend who came to pick her up, the car she was driving was towed to a workshop, and Emily never took that route again. And she's never saw those people again, and still wonder what could have happened if she didn't travel far to get to that elderly couple's house. So this happened to me and my brother while we were basically home with my mom. My mom was resting because she wasn't feeling good, and this happened during an ice storm back in 2016. Before my parents had gotten separated, we lived in this one house that was attached to another house. It was not the best street to live in, as you would occasionally might hear some sirens a few times a week, but it was not the best or the safest city ever, but it was still something. Sometime in March, we had a really terrible ice storm in our hometown, and my brother and I were basically on our computers and we're just, playing video games and watching YouTube videos when all of a sudden our power got knocked out. It was around maybe, I guess you could say, midnight when it happened, or at least around 11, and the power was knocked out. So, with that said, we couldn't use our phones or devices or anything, and our internet was down, so we couldn't do much. So my brother and I decided we would just go to bed early, as we didn't have school, but what else was there left to do? As we were going outside, my brother said that he saw someone outside in our front yard. I looked over, but I couldn't see. There was what seemed to be a truck that I never seen. It looked like a Chevrolet, but it looked really weird. It was a brown one, but I couldn't really see what it was. And who was this man? I had no idea who he was. He seemed to be staring at me or at the blue of something. He didn't notice me, and I know that my dad was still out doing his tow truck business on calls on the terrible snowstorm, but I couldn't see why was this guy there. He just looked at me awkwardly, and I texted my dad asking him about what I should do, and my dad said to go hide in the bedroom, make sure the door is locked, and call the cops. I did that, and as soon as I looked over, the man was no longer in the front, but I hear banging coming from the downstairs. I nearly shit myself. I was that scared. I didn't expect that, so I went to go wake up my mom and told her that my dad was on his way home. My mom immediately called the police, and of course, before this guy, we thought he could smash through our back door as it was glass. The police arrived and arrested the dude, and as soon as they did show up, they arrested the guy. When the police came up to the door and knocked, we looked to see that they had somehow found a way in, and of course, they asked if I was okay and if I knew the man. I didn't know, and neither did my brother, so we really had no idea of why this guy was here and what was this guy wanted. This was definitely scary, as I never saw this guy, and with that said, we never really went over to see him. With that being the case, though, we really didn't even bother to say anything with the guy. Of course, this man was officially taken home and, well, to prison, basically. And with that said, we never saw him again. And that was the only reason why my dad would be staying home as much as he could with us. With that being said, we never had a winter storm since then. And I still wonder, what would this guy do if, and what would he have done if we did not act fast? God only knows what could have happened to us. About maybe a year or so ago, this happened to me and my mom while we were walking through the forest in the snow. We were taking our dog to go for a little walk, and of course, the storm was about to start, and we had to go because we were having a bad snowstorm and it was going to come and head our way before then. So, in the morning, we decided to take him out, but it wasn't until maybe late afternoon when the storm started to hit. Now, of course, while mom and I were walking back, as we were walking back, we heard what seemed to be footsteps, or at least someone or something running through the forest in the snow. I couldn't honestly see or hear who or what it was, but I know it looked something really suspicious. I called out, "Who's out there?" But there was no one there, and this is when my mom and I started to get really uncomfortable. My mom called out if anyone was out there, but we couldn't see anybody, and then I heard what seemed to be a crying of a young woman. It sounded like if it was sounding like my mom's age, and this is when things got really weird. My mom and I decided to go follow what this sound was, and as soon as we were heading over there, I stopped short and saw in the distance that the crying was on a loop. And I realized that whoever it was probably trying to lure some unexpected people into the trap. My mom and I immediately got out of the woods with our dog, and with that said, we ended up reporting this to the authorities and even the sheriff, and then we even reported to the police, and they looked everywhere in that place, and they found a tape recorder, and they found at least a dead body of a 17-year-old boy. I was really shocked, as maybe this guy was trying to lure us into the trap, and whoever the killer was probably not friendly, and most likely he would have done the same thing to me and my brother, well, my mom, and possibly my dog, if we went down there. We have no idea if they found him or not, but if they did, they probably did not alert us, or at least notify us about the update. But with that said, I have no idea as who or what was trying to lure us into the trap, but we were not stupid enough to fall for it.